Good evening. It's live now. Well, thank you very much for joining us today in this virtual port wine tasting. My name is Oscar Quevedo, and thank you very much for helping us to get as much as 3.5 thousand pounds for the people involved with the COVID-19. I think it's a great amount that is going to be split between the UK charities, actually the NHS, and the local Pesqueira Amiga charity that is also helping children and elder people to go through this dramatic virus that is now changing our life. Well, this is happening because Vintage Wine and Port, Tony Carter got involved. He's our importer in the UK for the ports that you are tasting this evening. And the other team that is also involved in the tasting today is Alex Bridgman and Ben Reed from the B45 tasting. Without them, this wouldn't happen. This wouldn't be possible. On our side, so I'm going to be the one that's going to be here for the next hour, today and tomorrow. Two people are with me, right next to me. One is Frederick Blair. Fred, can you please? Fred is going to be with on the chatting platform. So if you have any suggestions, if you have any questions, anything that you want to ask me, Fred is gonna mention it during the presentation. And probably the most important person nowadays actively involved in our business. She is here, Claudia Quevedo, my sister. I promised her that it would be less than 30 seconds. So, Claudia, can you come here, please?
Hello, welcome to our tasting. I hope you enjoy your time with Oscar and enjoy our wines. I hope to see you one day here in Pesqueira. Bye, have a nice night.
Well, good. So, I think it's a good moment to give you a small introduction on port, and then we go through a bit of the history of the family. And later on, we start tasting the ports. I'm sure that you may have already opened those bottles. I hope you did. You have smelled and maybe tasted those. Totally fine. But I will give you some introductory notes on port and on our family history to prepare everyone for this tasting. So the history of port goes back to the middle of the 17th century, about 1650. At that time, due to a war between the UK and France, the king of the United Kingdom decided to close the borders and he forbade imports of wine from France. At the time, most of the wine was coming from Burgundy and from Bordeaux in France. So the British merchants, they had a problem. They need to find wine in other parts of Europe to supply to the thirsty British consumers. So where did they go? Well, they went to Spain, to a city on the coast that is called Jerez de la Frontera. And there they discovered sherry. They also went to Marsala, which is a city on the coast of Sicily in Italy. They went to Madeira, a Portuguese island off the coast of Morocco, in the middle of the Atlantic. And the reason why you are here today, they visited Porto or Oporto. And in Oporto, they found a wine that was being traded in this relatively big city, second biggest city of Portugal. And they were trading textile for food, mainly wine, but also some salt. So when the merchants get the wine on board, they bring it to England, and it's when port starts to be known and famous. And this is the beginning of port. Later on, in 1756, the King of Portugal asked his Prime Minister, Marquis de Pombal, to regulate and delimit the Douro wine region, which is the region where port is produced. The area where port comes from is all in the northeast of Portugal, in a place that it's called Douro, which takes its name from the river that starts in Spain. In Spain, they call it Duero, and when it gets to Portugal, we call it Douro, which means of gold. And it's this land in the northeast of Portugal that is famous for the port it produces. So in 1756, a part of regulating the region, the king also said that all exports of port wine have to take place from the city of Porto. Nowadays, for those that visit Porto, across the river, it's Villanova de Gaia. Villanova de Gaia is on one bank, on the south bank, Porto is the north bank. In the past, Porto would cross the river to the south bank as well. So, this is how it starts. But when it started, the families that were growing the grapes and making the port were not really integrated into the sales side. The sales were being taken by the shippers, the merchants that were based in the city of Porto. Many of them were from the United Kingdom, from England, from Scotland, from the Netherlands, Denmark, Germany, Norway, several countries. And those merchants would ship the wine and take it to their countries. People in the Douro would be allowed to sell to the merchants based in Porto with their ports. So my family starts making port in 1889, growing grapes and making port in a very small scale. My sister Claudia and me, we are the fifth generation of port producers. And we were growing the grapes and making the ports to sell to the merchants. Some of them are names that you may know, like Taylor's or Barros, Coffee. And this situation lasted until 1986. Do you know what happened in 1986? It's the year that Portugal joins the European Union. And at that time, the European Union said, it's no longer allowed. We cannot allow that there is still a kind of a monopoly, a restriction, geographic restriction on who can export port wine. So once Portugal joins the European Union, it starts to be allowed to export port directly from the Douro Valley. And that's when many families in the Douro, they change their businesses from production to also bottling and selling. It happened with our family. So our parents, Claudius and mine, they start building this winery in 1990. And 1991 was the first year that they made, or we made, port in this facility. Before, my family, my great-grandparents and grandparents, they were making the ports in smaller places next to their houses in a much more limited quantity. So many things happened and changed in the last 28, 29 years for our family. So we stopped selling to the merchants to start labeling our own port. And what's interesting now, what's curious now is that we were able during these 28 years to export 94% of our production to 32 countries. So thank you guys in the UK for supporting us also in this journey. Well, of the port that we make, about of the wine that we make, about 2/3 is port and 1/3 is wine. Actually, the Douro wine is getting better and better known a little bit everywhere, and we have been facing a growing demand for it. We have 121 hectares of vineyards. We are not autosufficient, so we need to purchase grapes from local farmers, from neighbors, also from other parts of the family that are involved in the growing of the of grapes. So we have a community that supports us and that with who we collaborate with, not only in terms of the workers, which are about 30 people that are involved in our operation, from the people working in the fields, in the vines, and in the olive grove, to those working at the winery. And we are based in a small, relatively small town that is named São João da Pesqueira. This is right in the middle of geographic middle of the Douro Valley. If you have heard of Pinhão, this is about 30 minutes drive, 30 minutes drive from Pinhão towards east. So if you have any questions, write those. Yeah, and Fred will pass the questions to us. Just a small note: there is a thunderstorm happening right now, so if in case that the broadcast just finishes, we're gonna try to come back as soon as possible. So you are aware of that. This was made by my 5-year-old boy, Mark, with a bit of help of 3-year-old Alba, my daughter. I have 3 kids in total. Good. How did my sister and me join the family business? So Claudia studied enology, winemaking in Vila Real, a city that is the biggest city in the Douro area. And after working for a year in one of the port merchants, she came to join the family business. At the time, my father was in charge of the winemaking, and Claudia started working in the family business in 1999. It took me 10 more years to join the family business, and it happened a little bit by chance. Well, a little bit. I started getting interested in wine and port around 2006, 2007. Until then, I always swear that I would never want to work in this business. I told my parents, this is not for me. I love the financial markets, especially equity trading. So that's what I wanted to do, and I did it until 2009. But in 2006, I met a friend, Ryan Opaz. He's still a very good friend, and he always, throwing a lot of ideas into the table. And he suggested me to create a blog. At the time, was the first blog from a port producer, 2007, and I was working in finance in Switzerland, in Geneva, for a Portuguese bank. And when you start getting involved, even if it's in very small steps into this business, into the wine business, it's hard then to go away. And when my grandfather dies in 2009, my grandfather João, he was my best friend. He was my mentor. He was my hero. And because of him, when he passed away in March 5th, I thought something changed. There was kind of a light. I have no religion, but I thought that something was calling me to come to help my family. It was my time to help, and that's when I moved back to Pesqueira. I studied here until I was 15. Then I went away, and then I came back, and that's when I joined the company to help in the sales and marketing. And eventually, in 2020, on May 7th, we do this live YouTube from our cellar because of the COVID-19 with your support. Good.
Questions? Well, actually, I think there's some things we can build on and continue explaining probably about the history of port. So, first question someone asked is, according to him, port has its origin in Scottish family. Did anyone in your family know the correct brands or tailors personally? Maybe we can also explain a little bit what are exactly the origin of port from dry to semi-dry to fortified. And the second question is, what is the oldest stock of vintage port you used to blend?
Okay, cool. So first question, how it's is the origin of port related to a Scottish family, and how does it relate with tailors and brands?
Or do your family have relation or used to?
Okay, so well, my family, as far as I know, Quevedo is a Spanish name. I don't know when we came to Portugal, but probably over 300 or 400 years ago. So I don't really know. I feel totally Portuguese. Actually, I married a Spaniard girl, but my family is local. It's a local family from the Douro. The merchant, we don't have any relation with tailors or with brands or with Offley or Sandeman. Sandeman who was a Scottish. Um, Port, in its origin, it's a dry wine. So imagine like a regular wine that you bring to your table with no sweetness and regular alcohol of 12, 13% alcohol. But because of the long transport time from the city of Oporto to, I don't know, Southampton, London, the port south of England, the merchants were adding wine spirits, a kind of a brandy, to increase the alcohol content to about 20% on the top of the barrel that was carrying a dry wine. So in its origin, port is a dry wine with a higher alcohol level and a higher alcohol level and no sweetness. It's in the beginning of the 19th century in 1810 when some say because of the monks in the Douro that were making port during the fermentation, so stopping the fermentation process by increasing the alcohol with the use of a brandy, a wine spirit. In this way, they would kill the yeast that is the responsible for the fermentation, and would keep part of its sweetness. So port started being sweet at around 1810. This is the monks version. The other version is that there was one harvest in the Douro that was extremely warm with very high sugar level. And because of this high sugar level, the yeast was not able to finish the fermentation, was not able to process all sugars into alcohol. And there was some sugar left into the wine port. And this sweeter version of port appealed a lot to the British consumers. And since then, we start leaving part of the sweetness that that we have from the grape juice. We leave it in the wine, so we get port a bit of this sweetness. So this starts in 1810, 1820. Actually, one of the most prominent businessmen in the port trade was against this sweeter version of port, Mr. James Forrester. And it took several years to get a market consensus, to get everyone agreeing on port to have a little bit of a sweetness. In general, so market average is about 110 grams of residual sugar per liter. In our family style, we are a little bit drier. So we try to have our ports with around 90 grams. That's what you may find in our ports. And once I asked my grandfather, why is that? Why is our port a little bit drier than the market is producing? And because of that, Fred started serving me the port, big Fred. Because of this lower sweetness that we have in our port, I asked my grandfather. Sorry, I love my thinking. So why I asked my grandfather, why are we a little bit drier? And he told me, if you believe in your grapes, if you believe in your fruit, you don't need the sugar to go so high. Sugar works like a makeup. It's gonna hide bad things, but it also hides good things. So if you have good grapes, if you have a good fruit, no need to be so high on the sweetness. Let's go a little bit lower, and then we have more of the experience of the grape into our port. So let's see what you think about that.
And quickly,
Yeah, I get it.
the second question was which the oldest stock of Indian
Yeah.
port you've blended, or maybe which is the oldest port you have here to blend in your locations?
Oldest port that we have here in the cellar is 1965 in cask. Some of those behind me are 68, a couple from the 70s. Actually, this year we decided to bottle a 1970 white, which is very unusual. Maybe I leave that for tomorrow, the explanation of that for tomorrow's tasting, as now it's maybe time to get into the ports.
Yeah, so briefly, tomorrow we can talk a bit more about the white. There's Malcolm that says I, and he wants to know a bit more about your white reserve, so maybe you can have a quick 2 minute section about white port tomorrow.
Yeah, Malcolm, we do the white ports tomorrow. So, Tawny Port. What is Tawny Port? Actually, where is the word tawny coming from? Anyone? Tawny Port. Have you heard of the Tony Howell? Tony Howell lives in England, in the United Kingdom, and the feathers of the Tony Owl are like a light brown brick color. So that's the color that port develops once it ages in barrel. In those beans behind me, that's what makes port Tawny. It's the long time in barrel. Let me rotate a little bit the camera so you'll see more parts of the cellar where the Tawny ports are aging. So can you see some of these other barrels? Some are bigger, some are smaller. You know, it's always important to have different sizes so we can decide on if we should go quicker or slower in terms of the aging process. Because of the aging in the barrel, the oxygen is going to go through the oak and is going to change three things in the port, in the Tawny port. First, the color. Port, when it's produced, has a dark red color. Time is going to free the colors. If you put it in bottle, it stays red. It's going to get lighter and lighter and lighter red, but it's going to be on the red spectrum, on the ruby color spectrum. Tawny, if you mature it in the barrel, it's going to switch to brown. Dark brown, medium brown, lighter brown, eventually towards amber, and when it's very, very old, it starts to get some green hints. So the oxidation changes the color to brown and changes the aromas, taking away the freshness of the grape, those plums and blackberries and sometimes strawberry flavors that young port has, and it changes towards more of nuts, dry fruit, some chocolate, tobacco notes that may develop throughout the aging in the barrel. And finally, on your palate, you'll feel it more soft. Young wine has a lot of tannins. because the red grapes are rich in tannins. Tannins are something that we find a lot in cacao. So it makes dark chocolate bitter. We also have a lot in meat. And red port, when it's very young, is very tannic and sometimes rough. Aging the tawnies in barrel are going to soft down these flavor, these flavors, and the more sharper part that the tawnies may have. So this special reserve, it's an 8-year-old blend. It means that it's not the average that has to be exactly 8 years old. It's more the style that has to be of a port that matured in barrel for about 8 years. We will see exactly that same way of thinking when you taste the next port, the 10 years old. So the average does not have to be precisely 10 years. It has to have the character of a port that matured for 10 years in a barrel, the port barrel.
If Alex asking, how do you make your tawny port? Do you use a solo approach or blend stocks and then bottle it immediately?
How do we make our tawny port? So consistency is probably one of the most, if not the most important thing that we need to get when we are having a long-term approach to port. It means that our reserve tawny should taste similar throughout the next decades. How can we make that? We have a base of barrels that we always put into this style of port. But as we bottle it, we need to get new barrels to join the majority of the barrels that are put apart to this blend. So it's important to keep a consistency of barrels that we use into the same port, knowing that every year that we're gonna, anytime that we are going to do bottling, we have to put younger port into the barrels that were emptied and wait until them are ready to be used for the blend again. So for the 8 years old blend, we are using port that is as young as 6 years, but also as old as 12 in different percentages. And the young port is gonna bring us some freshness, while the older port is gonna bring more of the nutty character, a more caramel flavor, and some more oxidative notes. So it's really the work of the winemaker to bring to produce this blend. It's my sister. She has that in the good position that she has to taste like over 1,000 vessels every 6 months or every year or so. She needs to know what is in each one and how can she use that. Um, we have a spectrum of maybe 15 different ports that we bottle every year, if not more. So it's important to know what are we going to use to each single blend. Any other questions, Fred?
Now, so far, people, I suggested to people that they can start pairing the port with the food. They can start sipping it and give some feedback. So far, Joanna is saying that this tawny is delicious and pairs very well with almonds. We got Bob who's saying that this tawny has wonderful flavor and smell. Do you want to talk a bit about serving temperature that you recommend and the pairing for this port and how well it matches?
So we are being a little bit mean because our food suggestion for this port, and maybe it will only happen again once or twice throughout the 6 ports that are going to taste. It's grilled almonds. They were peeled this afternoon by Frederick Blair. He's a very good chef. We had the luck of get taste his food throughout the last harvest between September and October, and he decided to bring the super typical Douro almonds to our tasting this evening. Almond trees are very typical in the Douro. Many times we use them to delimit the border between our parcel and our neighbors. And a part of the almond trees, the other tree that is also key in the Douro culture is the olive tree. I didn't tell you, but we have also production of organic olive oil in a small village that is Valongo dos Azeites. So the grilled almonds are delicious, and I think they go well with this reserve Tawny port. So the Tonys are good. We said that the Tonys are getting lighter, and more than lighter is like browner, orange towards orange and caramel color when they get older. Maybe it's time to go to the 10 years old. What do you think about that, Fred?
Yeah, sure, for sure. I'll bring it. Just want to remind you, talk about the temperature. And a good question by Ollie is, how long can we keep the bottle once open if we don't want to finish the bottle tonight?
Two very good questions. Thank you. Temperature. Well, we grew up hearing our parents and grandparents saying that we should serve wine at room temperature. What is room temperature? What is room temperature nowadays? What was room temperature 50 years ago or 100 years ago when there was no heating systems in our houses? Maybe room temperature 50 years ago was, I don't know, 15, 16 degrees at most. That's a good temperature to serve red wine. The more tannins we have in a wine, the warmer we need to serve them towards the limit of 18 degrees. Less tannins means that we can go a little bit lower in temperature, and tonics have a lower amount of tannins. So, in my opinion, if the temperature outside is above 10 or 12 degrees, put it in the fridge before you serve it for an hour, or just leave it there for the next day, and it will have a lot of time to warm up in your glass. Your house is not at 15 degrees. Your house is probably at 20 degrees. And the glass is going to be at 20 degrees as well when you serve the port. So if you serve it at the precise temperature that you should serve, like 14 degrees, this tawny port, it quickly goes up to 18, 20 degrees. So I always like to be a bit more aggressive in terms of serving temperatures and go lower and let it warm up in the glass. And if it's too cold, you just be patient, swirl or warm up the glass. It's easy. For the other question, Ollie's question about for how long can we keep a bottle of Tawny Port open? Well, Tonys are very generous in this sense because they can be left open for several weeks, even months. What happens is that here in the barrel, oxygen is going through the oak and oxidizes the flavors. When you open your bottle of port, of Tawny Port, you serve the port in the glass, and inside of the bottle, it's going to have oxygen, and this oxygen is what is going to change and accelerate the life of the wine. But because the Tawny Port aged for so long in barrel, there is really no need to be nervous about drinking it. I mean, you can finish the bottle in 2 or 3 days, especially if they are like halves. But you don't need to. You can wait. I would be as aggressive as 3 months for a younger Tony, and when you're talking about a very old Tony over 30 or 40 years, we can go as much as 6 months. This is totally different for ruby ports, and we will see that tomorrow. It's like opposite.
I think it's important to mention that the wine will never be bad to taste. It will just be different and it keep its original character in the first few months.
So Fred is saying something interesting, which is the tawny is not going it's not going bad. It just changes a lot throughout these several months. And the oxidation is going to be more pronounced. The freshness is going to disappear, but it still be drinkable. And I can tell you that in some cases I enjoy my bottles a little bit later than when they are open, like and serve it right after. A little bit later is maybe 1, 2, 3 days. But if you go like 2 months, it's not going to be a big change. Good. Oh, it's not raining. It's not raining. Good. So the next port is going to be the 10-year-old Tawny. Can you see the label? We have a lot of, it's shining a little bit. You have the bottle right there.
Shiny.
It's too shiny. Maybe you could put the ruler a little bit inside.
Yeah.
So to get the best connection, we put the router right in the window to make sure that we get a very high signal. But if it's raining now, we should put it a little bit inwards. Good. So 10 years old, it means that this port is a style of 10 years, a port that matured for 10 years in barrel. It's still a blend. The oldest port that we have here is 14 years. The youngest is 8 years. And we will see an evolution in terms of color and flavor when we get into when we feel it to the nose. For the 10-year-old Tawny, we are suggesting Manchego cheese, and Fred made a special white port gelatin with lemon juice, orange juice. So keep sharing your questions with us. Fred, could you serve me the result?
Put it in my glass. I'm gonna be doing a blend, and I have to taste it at the end of the.
Something interesting for you to see is the evolution of the Tawny Ports throughout this hour that we are doing this tasting. They will change a little bit, especially the temperature that's of course going up, but you will see probably less changes today than what you will see tomorrow when you serve the rubies. So we can see that the color is getting lighter and more towards tawny, like the owl's feathers color. More browner, orange. You can see that the flavors get a bit more on the nutty side, more almonds, walnuts, a bit of caramel, bringing a bit of the sweet touch to the nose.
You want to explain to people why your port, when they're young, they look younger maybe than the competition? Or,
And then on the palate, it's soft. You can feel it a little bit more of the aging compared to the previous port, the Reserve Tawny. But it lingers, it stays there, and it says, waves and says, I'm here, I'm still here. Well, being located in São João da Pesqueira, which is in an area that we get about 300 millimeters of rain in a year, which is relative, it's very low for vine growing. It basically means that we are having a lower yield per hectare. Our grapes are more concentrated in this region as we move inland towards Spain, towards east. And the less juice that we have means that we have a higher concentration of color and flavors, which is good on one side, bad on the other, because our ports, especially the tonics, will need a longer time, more time to get into the tawny color. So they are very fresh and fruity when they are young, and after a few decades, you start getting this really intense nuttiness that is typical in the tawnies. But that's it's the terroir, as the French would say. It's the typicity of our location. So as we are going towards the end of the first day, don't be shy. Drop your questions to Fred. Fred's gonna share it with us, and then I will be happy to help you. The next port is from a single harvest. 2004 colheita. Colheita, one of the very few Portuguese words in the port industry. Colheita 2004. This means that, contrarily to the previous two ports, this one, it's from a single harvest. We did not blend. So basically, my sister's work finished at the last day of the harvest of 2004. Well, not quite really, because then she has to decide if the port goes into the smaller casks or if it goes into the bigger ones, and for how long in the big ones, how long in the small ones. She has to take all these decisions. But it's going to show you, it's going to represent the harvest in its best. And then the slow aging in barrel brings the complexity through this word I don't know very well to pronounce, but I'll try it once again. Tertiary flavors, something like this. Tertiary flavors. Thank you.
Got two questions as we move on to the Quevedo. First, in which glass are you drinking your port, and why is that? And then, what kind of approach are you using when you're sourcing grapes that you're buying? Do you try to get locally or to get some other terroir?
First question: glasses for port. Well, I think it's important to have a glass where your fingers are not going to be in contact with the where the liquid is. For two reasons. One, temperature. Your body's at 37. The liquid, you want to preserve it as 14 degrees. Second, for you to check the color, you need the glass to be clean, ideally pristine, so you can easily see how the color of the port looks like. A relatively open glass, not too much. Port has 19% alcohol. It's a lot. And if the glass is too open, you will feel a lot of the alcohol coming through your nose. So we picked these glasses. These are actually a special glass. Gabriel is the manufacturer of the glasses, and he's a friend of Fred. So yeah, something like these, like white wine glasses. White wine glasses are a little bit smaller than the red wine glasses. Sometimes we also serve our port in a little bit smaller glass, and it's more like kind of, I don't know, the port size. But those sometimes are a little bit too narrow. In the second glass,
the rim is too thick as well. You want
yeah,
a delicate touch on
yeah. So ideally, you have a thinner glass, so the touch is it's minimum. Second question: when we buy grapes, from where do we buy them from? We try to stay as local as possible. Buying from our neighbors, from the family, but sometimes not possible. Sometimes we need. One of the things that our village is known for is red grapes. So we have our own plantations of white grapes in higher altitude, where the weather is fresher and the soil is deeper. But our white grapes production is not enough for what we need. So we like to go for areas like Meda or Garrazeda, Mursa, that area in between, where we find grapes that pretty much fulfill our preferences. So when it's not possible to go local, I mean, we source a little bit further. Any other question, Fred?
Yeah, just one very good question happening right now from Jonathan, asking, what do you do when you decide this is going to Colheita, and like this in 2004, well, you waited 15 years before saying this would be a Colheita, and when do you decide to make a vintage or Colheita?
Jonathan's question: how do we decide about the different ports produced in a certain year? which go to ruby style, to vintage port, which go to tawny style. Well, nature in maybe in other things, but in grapes production is very consistent. The best vineyards to make a certain style, typically they are consistent throughout years. So if you know your vineyards, and my sister and me, we grew up in this small village. We we know a lot of very well our vineyards and our neighbors' vineyards. So we can feel what's the best that those grapes can give you. If they should go to a, if you want them in a dark red port like a vintage port or a late bottle vintage port, or if you prefer to have the grapes have the elegance and the acidity to go into a tawny port. This is the decision is made. The first decision is made in July, prior to the harvest, when we start going through the vineyards and say, this vineyard's gonna go to this wine, this to that, this to that, and sometimes we are wrong. I mean, just because the nature that year produced something different, or we were not able to get the wine that we were expecting. So throughout the first and second winters, we do several tastings of the same vintage ports, but from different vessels, different tanks, and we try to decide on what should go into the tawnies, what should go into the ruby style, and among those, what has the character, the personality to go into a colheita, and it's gonna keep this style for a long period of time. Or if you think that this wine is more gentile, it's more delicate, so it's great for a young tawny. It's gonna show well when it's young. And the same thinking applies to the ruby style. So the first decision is taken a couple of months before the harvest starts.
All right, so now that we're almost running out of time, questions are pouring in just like the rain. So Sarah is asking, well, she has a few questions. So she's asking if you are approaching the winemaking different for rubies or for tawnies. And then also a very good question is, what about organic port? Are you making any?
So first question, Sarah's question. Do we have a different approach for ruby style and that we have for tawny style? Yes. Rubies shall be darker, fruitier, more intense, and maybe bold. Tawnies, we want them elegant, soft, delicate. So we know that the color and most of the flavors are coming from the skin of the grape. Actually, it would be possible to make a white wine from red grapes as long as you do not break the cells of the skin that have the pigment, the color. One of the best, if not the best example in the world is champagne. About 50% of champagne is coming from red grapes, and it's a white wine. I'm talking about white champagne, not about rosé champagne. So for the ruby ports, going back to our port territory, for ruby ports, we want to have darker color. So we want to extract more from the skin. And because of that, we go lower in altitude to vineyards located next to the Douro River, where the rainfall is lower, temperature is higher, and the grapes are more concentrated. They are not raisins, but they are more towards that direction. We don't want them in raisins. We just want the vine to suffer a bit of hydro stress, to be under or below its ideal level of water. Then we get better grapes for ruby style. For tawny style, as we want more elegance, we don't want to extract so much from the skin. So higher altitude vineyards and less extraction during the fermentation. It's used for the tawny ports. Another question about organic ports. Well, in 2005, my father is one of the big passions of my father is he's also Oscar, so I take his name. Is are the olive groves. In around 2005, he planted 4,000 trees, and he decided to start growing it organically. And when I came to the family business in 2009, I just realized that we were selling organic olive oil, and we didn't even mention on the label. We just grew it organic because we thought it was going to be better quality, but the consumer was not knowing that it was organic. So quality, I mean, production comes before the marketing, and that's good. In 2012, my sister and me, we decided to convert the first parcel into organic, the first 5 hectares. And we start producing a reserve ruby. There's 3 years of conversion, 2012, 13, 14. And in 2015, we start producing our first organic port. And we put some aside, and we want to release also, apart from the reserve ruby that is already on the market, we want to release a Tawny port this year that is also organic. Our commitment with organic increased, and we are now close to 20 hectares of organic farming, organic vineyards. About 3 hectares, if I'm not wrong, are white, and the others are 17 are reds or red grapes, in which some included are Touriga Nacional, Touriga Franca, Sousão, and we have new plantations of Tinta Barroca also growing under organic, and few experiments that we cannot really tell you. Well, we will tell you when you come to visit us. That's it. So, last round of questions, Fred?
Yeah, I think some two interesting questions. First, when do you decide that it's time to bottle your Colgeta? Are some Colgeta bottled earlier than others, some later? Is there a rule of thumb that Quevedo's Colgeta should always be after X number of years in barrel? And then somebody is curious about what is your all-time favorite port?
Oh, wow. So if you read the back label, like the bar, like above the barcode, you will see the bottling year. This 2004 was bottled in 2019. It means that it was matured for about 15 years. The first two were definitely not in barrel. We only put the port in barrel after the first 2 winters to make sure that the sediment goes to the bottom with the cold temperatures during the winter. And once you put the port in barrel, it's already quite clarified. So there is no, I don't believe in a perfect timing to put colhetas in barrel. I think there is, it's like a shooting of yourself or of a family. You like to see your photos, and you know that throughout your life you're gonna get old, but it's always good to see you when you were young and throughout all the phases of your life. So we did not bottle last year all our 2004 Colheita. We bottled part of it, maybe 10%, 12, I don't know, 15%. Honestly, I don't have it on the top of my head. But what I know is that we want to keep a lot of this port to the next generation. They have they should have the possibility to decide what they want to do. Like my sister and me had when our parents left us their collection. So we like to do small bottlings of Colheita and revisit those years every 3, 4, 5 years. So right now we have on the market 92, 96, 2004. We had before 94, 95, 97, 90, 2000, 2002. So yeah, there's not really a rule. It's more of a feeling that we get. And there was another question.
So, which is the best port you had in your life?
Best port.
And if somebody also just recently asked, which is the oldest port you have in your cellar?
Okay. Well, with 2 questions. What's the oldest port that I have in my cellar, and what is the best port I tasted in my life? I think the answer is the same, and then we finish. And why is it the same? I was lucky enough to to be invited by family of friends, the Allen family, to produce a 20-year-old Tawny for them in collaboration with them about 6, 7 years ago that we started this project. And the Allens were owners of Quinta do Noval at the time of until the phylloxera, pretty much. Quinta do Noval is one of the most well-known estates, quintas in the Douro. And they still have, and I believe nowadays they still have in their cellar port that is from 1920, 1820, so 200 years old. And in one of the first meetings that we had when we were going back with the samples from our barrels to try the different ports, how we make the blend for them, try to craft something that is very personalized and that it's in the direction of what their family was producing. José Alberto goes down to the cellar and pulls one bottle from 1827, and it opens to me and gives it to me to taste. And I I was lucky that I was sitting down, otherwise I would fall to the floor. It's an amazing experience. It's not the it's a direction of flavors that you have never experienced in your life. We taste something that after 200 years of being produced, and it was still drinkable, it was still good. And this was probably the best experience that I have in port. And he gave me also one of those bottles.
Good to know.
No, but no, Fred, I'm sorry, but I honestly, I have kind of promised to myself that I may pass that bottle to the next generation because I was lucky enough already to taste it. So I think my kids are going to, and maybe my nephews, they would like to taste it as well. So it's almost 1 hour time of tasting. And maybe we can say goodbye and see you tomorrow. Bring more questions tomorrow. We'll be here at the same time. And thank you for joining us. Have the rest of a good evening. Bye bye.